Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today's Thursday, October 26th, 2023. I'm Christine Niles here with my two co-hosts, Alex Carzon and Brad Eli. A young black author is complaining that her books are now less likely to be found in schools. 25-year-old Amanda Gorman is speaking out after Scholastic announced its plans to separate controversial books involving race, politics, or sexuality from its normal offerings at elementary school book fairs. For those who don't know, Scholastic often comes to American schools and sets up shop for a few days each year selling children's books, with some of the proceeds going to the school. I remember they did that all the time when I was a kid. I was always so excited to go and get my money to buy those books during the Scholastic book fairs. And on October 13th, the publishing company said it was moving books about race and LGBT issues to a separate diversity collection that elementary schools can opt out of. For example, if their state has tight laws against leftist propaganda in the classroom, that's actually great news. But here's what Gorman said recently about the company's decision.
If you haven't heard, Scholastic has announced that for their book fairs across the country, they have created a separate bookcase collection titled Share Every Story, Celebrate Every Voice. But it doesn't feel that way. Let me tell you why. This collection of books are diversity books written most often by authors of color, authors from the LGBTQ community, and authors of the disabled community. And what this case does is creates a collection of books which educators can opt in or opt out of. My book was one of the books that is in this new collection, my book Change Sings with Lauren Long. And it's heartbreaking to see this road Scholastic has taken. I get it in a certain extent because thousands of book bans have been launched this year alone. We were seeing a skyrocket rise in legislation that makes it dangerous for educators, librarians, families to make accessible books that have basically been blacklisted.
Too bad, so sad. She's such a victim. If you recognize her, it's probably because she was the inaugural poet at Joe Biden's inauguration back in 2021. Gorman, by the way, is Catholic. She's a member of a predominantly black parish in Los Angeles. So I'm just going to read just a few lines from that poem that she recited at Biden's inauguration. It's very long, so I'm just going to read just a short snippet of it. But, it says, "To compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all." It just goes on and on, like in that vein. So clearly, what she's obviously referring to here is not necessarily all cultures, and all factions linking arms, because she very, very clearly comes from a particular culture and a particular faction, which is very much into the whole, got to focus on racism, LGBT, whatever. Meaning people like us would probably be excluded because we're just hateful. But racism, as we all know, seems to be like the big thing in the past several years. Everything's about racism. Everything's about, but the problem is it's very selective. Because if colleges and schools really taught the true history of racism, they would actually teach that more white slaves were brought to North America than black slaves. Nobody ever talks about that. They would teach about the fact that the Barbary Coast trade, the slave trade of the Barbary Coast Muslims, a lot of the pirates, many of the pirates, people know this, were Muslims. And you know who the slaves were? Thousands upon thousands of white Christians, white Christian Europeans were enslaved in massive numbers, the same amount of numbers as African American slaves. They don't talk about the fact that fellow black African Americans were selling other African Americans into slavery. In fact, that was the primary slave trade. How did white masters own black slaves? It's because they were actually being sold by black African Americans to these white masters. So there's clearly a double standard in this country. We've all known that. And as far as this concern about racism, it's not really concern about racism. It's more concern about protecting a particular color and class, not all racism.
Yeah, what we got going on here, just for the people who aren't necessarily tuned in, drop back to about 2020, and all the classrooms were at home. Everybody was out of the schools, so because of all the COVID lockdowns, restrictions, and everything. So the parents all of a sudden got this tuned into, what in the world are you teaching my kids right now? This is crazy. Critical race theory, LGBT this, My Two Moms that book and everything. And they were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So all of that started to go through the parent-teachers boards, the school gatherings and all that. The red states started getting on board there and started putting laws into place that said, hey, we should get this stuff out of the schools. Our constituents, our upset parents, are really wanting this stuff taken care of. So what they did was start to pass a lot of laws. About 30 states now, according to Scholastic, have passed or are in the process of passing laws that are saying, hey, this stuff is not for little kids. The disheartening thing is it applies to elementary schools, kindergarten, third grade, and not to middle schools. At Scholastic's own admittance that they're not having to dial anything back at the middle school level and above. So let's get a press release here going on because of these red states pushing back, because of the parents pushing back, because the parents understood from 2020 what's being taught in the classroom because their kids were at home. October 13th, Scholastic had this press release. There is now enacted or pending legislation in more than 30 U.S. states prohibiting certain kinds of books from being in schools, mostly LGBTQIA plus titles, and books that engage, notice that just the hubris here, they just assume, the books that engage with the presence of racism in our country, aka everybody that's white is racist. Because Scholastic book fairs are invited into schools where books can be purchased by kids, as Christine mentioned at the beginning of the show, on their own, these laws create an almost impossible dilemma: back away from these titles or risk making teachers, librarians, volunteers vulnerable to being fired, sued, or prosecuted. So that's what they're responding to, is all these red state laws or pending laws that they say, well, if we put these books on your shelf, you're going to come after us. So we need to start dialing this back. And as Amanda Gorman was saying, that there was a secondary plan here that could go into effect in January. October 25th, Scholastic released an update for a new solution, and it says, we understand now that the separate nature of the collection has caused confusion and feelings of exclusion, and they went on to say, therefore, we're going to have this Share Every Story program that has all of these diverse titles on how all the white people are racist, critical race theory, and it's just systemic to our nation. You just can't get away from it. Johnny, you're only in third grade, but you don't realize but you're a racist, and math is racist, and all this other nonsense. We reported on this stuff at Church Militant, in the culture wars here. So they're saying that we're going to have a separate body of books here, and if you want, you can go ahead and import that. You're kind of on your own risk there, and we're letting you know that these books could cause problems to you, but at least we're making them available if you want to go there, because they're getting a lot of pushback now saying, why are you pulling back all these titles? And we're like, well, you're running up against the law here. So
well, and notice you're not going to find any Catholic or Christian books in that category. It's only for these types of books, the critical race theory and all that they're going to be putting these books in a separate category. So it's inclusion on our terms. We want to teach you about this and not anything else. So it's inclusive, but only what we say is inclusive. Another big association, the American Library Association, is big on pushing all of these different things, the LGBTQ, pornographic books and things like that, into different schools and whatnot. Their report that they came out with earlier this year said that there's a 40% uptick in challenges of books that they've allowed to be put in various institutions, and they were lamenting about that and saying, oh, why is there such a big uptick in all these complaints? Well, part of the problem is, like you said, 2020, the COVID times, parents started to recognize just what horrible things were available to young grade school students.
Oh, yeah.
And they were saying, we're not going to put up with this at all. And there's been a number of different states that have actually come out and said, we don't want to have funding anymore from the state government for the ALA because of this.
Yeah, it's good that, the parents pushing back caused Republican lawmakers to push back and start to enact, or are planning to, or have in the process of are pushing back, and that's being noted and being some self-censorship on the part of places like Scholastic, keeping this stuff out. I don't need my little son taught that he's inherently racist just because he's white. And isn't that racist itself, calling out a group of people, especially little kids? Oh, you're white, you're racist. Oh, you're black, you're not racist. You're yellow, you're not racist. Oh, the white one here, another one's racist. That's so racist. All you have to do a racist analysis is switch the color of the conversation, and if it turns out to be what the left would call racist, well, then it should be, also deemed racist if you're putting that other color in there as well. So,
yeah, and as we see, books right now are the primary way in which the left is trying to groom young children, just introducing these books, LGBT, transgender, all of that stuff. But the good news is that, conservatives and some, liberals as well who don't like this, who don't like the sexual grooming of children, as nobody should, are pushing back. And we really, a lot of the blame falls on the American Library Association. Now, I think a lot of people who are not aware, they just sort of think that, the American Library Association is just like a bunch of old ladies, like taking care of books. It's not like that at all. It's a completely leftist, socialist, Marxist organization. Absolutely, they support leftist causes. The president of the ALA was caught saying that she wanted to turn public libraries into like socialist indoctrination centers. This is where they are pushing the whole LGBT stuff. And in fact, we have a story from back in August where 3 senators were demanding accountability for the American Library Association because they actually were trying to censor a conservative Christian book company from having events in public libraries, which they can't do. They can't do that. They'll allow drag shows or drag queen story hour and all that kind of stuff. But if you recall, Kirk Cameron, he's the actor, the Christian actor, and he started this campaign to push back against all the drag queen public or whatever reading. He had a faith-based reading hour at the library, and public libraries everywhere were like, no, we're not going to let you do that. He's going to sit there and read a Christian book or read like from the Bible, and they wouldn't let him do that. And like I said, the ALA itself, the association itself, was caught helping them to censor him and silence him. And so these senators said, we want some accountability. They should be defunded. And the good news, too, is that a lot of states are beginning to separate themselves from the ALA, denying state funding to the ALA because they're beginning to recognize this is just a leftist, Marxist, radical socialist organization that's harming our children.
Yeah, I don't know what's worse with Amanda Gorman, that she claims to be victim when she's a millionaire, 25, top of her game. She has the globalists, the world's leaders, major corporations, wealthiest people in the world all supporting her agenda. Or that she's Catholic. And she was on air right there just talking about, people should be able to write on diversity, aka LGBT, how you can be gay and homosexual, all these different things, trans. And that's not Catholic. You would think it might be because of the play it gets today, or people don't come out. But the catechism, these is intrinsically, disordered activity. Inclinations are objectively disordered. So, that's the Catholic Church's teaching. It has been the teaching. It hasn't changed. Even if they change the catechism to water down something here, that doesn't change the teaching. It just changes softens the language so people aren't offended. Even Cardinal Schönborn said, well, there's objective teaching and then how you present the teaching. Okay, well, they're softening it to present the teaching, but doesn't change the reality, regardless of a pastor who's up there on the pulpit saying or not saying the clear truth. So, and she's Catholic. She calls herself Catholic, but look into, Amanda, if you're watching the show, look into the teaching of the church and get past this whole thing where you can't offend anybody, because that's maybe you're harsh in your presentation or soft or love, but ultimately love is calling them to the truth. And what is the truth? The truth is that these things are objectively disordered. Right. And that's not going to help anybody by presenting them with falsehood. If anything, school is there to always present the truth to young minds. And you as a Catholic should know the truth of these things, maybe in your history you're not attuned with the whole idea that systemic racism isn't a thing, or that math can't be racist. But, you should be able to think your way out of that one. But the idea that you're Catholic, then toe the line with Catholicism or stop calling yourself Catholic, one or the other.
Right. And it's not just that she totes herself as Catholic, but also an interesting note that I found out, her parish in Los Angeles, St. Bridget's parish in Los Angeles, which, as you mentioned, was a primarily black parish, they've actually all come out, a lot of the parishioners there, and they're all in support of her when she gave her inauguration speech. It was very much a rah-rah her, and look at us, this is one of our parishioners here. The pastor of the parish even said, whatever belongs to our parish belongs to everyone. The success of anyone is the success of all. And so it's interesting because even though it's completely geared towards something that's not Catholic at all, what she stands for in the books she publishes and all that, there is a sense of community that parish there has and that Catholic community has that we've sort of lost just by and large as Catholics.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading about her parish, St. Bridget, also, and the liturgy is very interesting. It says here, during a typical mass, an ensemble wearing dashikis and headdresses, some sort of African tribal dress, would sound African drums to call parishioners to gather for worship. So they get drums.
No bells ringing.
Yes, a gospel choir would follow, sending congregants to their feet as they dance and wave their arms, giving God praise and glory. And also one of the congregants said that everyone here is a, quote, freedom fighter. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, but let's fight for the truth. Let's fight for the freedom of these children's future. If you watch anything at all out there right now, the number of people who have gone through the whole trans and all the way through the debilitating activity of that are saying, hey, pastor, why didn't you give me the truth on this? Hey, lawmaker, hey, parents, hey, teachers, where were you when I needed you in all that confusing time? And now look at me. I'm irreversible. I can't do anything. So why, where were all you people with the truth? And here you have someone like Amanda, unfortunately, who is championing these books that have all this inherent idea of LGBTQI+ nonsense all the way down the line. And if anything, you're confusing little kids' minds because they don't have stable homes. They don't have catechist teachers teaching them the truth. They don't have teachers standing up to, they're just inundated with the world right now. It's amazing they can have any sane thoughts whatsoever. And here you're putting in one little bastille of hopefully where they have truth in their elementary school, and even they're injecting this stuff. It's just the poison. It's sad situation out there.
Yeah. And this is actually a good time too. So we know all the garbage out there. There's some good things. So we actually have a couple of children's books in our bookstore, which I would recommend if any of you have children or you want to send gifts to children. One of them is Aurora Borealis, and the other is 7 Clues by Dr. Scott Hahn, a wonderful Catholic professor and author. And they each have really nice illustrations inside, so the children would really like this on every single page, basically. Very nice illustrations, eye-catching. This also has very nice sketches. It's black and white, but it's a poem about a polar bear, essentially, and his quest to find the source of a joyous light. And yeah, it's actually very nicely illustrated. Again, you can find these in our bookstore. So.
And I have to say, as a parent, my son just loves to have a parent reading to him, reading a story to him, and loves to have pictures in the book that they can look at while they're doing that. So these little stories that are geared to little minds, and you can read them in kind of a dramatic fashion if you want, but that bonding time is just invaluable to a little kid. Just loves it.
Let me just second that, because I did reading to my children as well, and everybody promotes, if you're a parent, take the time to read to your children. I wish I'd done it more, but the times that I did do it, I am so grateful. So obviously, the picture books are great, but as they got a little bit older, I would still, before bedtime, they would come and snuggle in my bed. And for instance, one of the series that we went through that we loved was Little House on the Prairie. The books, not necessarily the TV is fine. Those episodes are fine, but the actual books are based on the real life biography of these pioneers, American pioneers. Now, they weren't Catholic, but they were very conservative Christians, and it was just so, they're so wholesome, they're so family-oriented, community-oriented, and you learn historically about the life of the pioneers, how difficult it was. They had to build their own log cabins, they had to endure winters, and how did they travel, and how did they work together and live together as a family, how did they pray, how did they cook, and it was just, I have such wonderful memories with my children doing that. I mean, it's just irreplaceable, and we know there's all this garbage out there, and we say this all the time. It's so important as parents to protect your children from this, to be vigilant, and for us to step in and do things like that, like you bring the wholesome books to the children, encourage them to read these wholesome books instead.
Yeah, we have little saints books and stuff like that too, but the one we're reading right now to my 6-year-old son is Little House on the Prairie.
Oh, yeah.
And glued to every word, you know.
Yeah.
And I have a little voice for each character in the story and all that type of stuff. And it's fun for me too. And I feel heartbroken sometimes. I come home a little bit late or got other things going on. And can you read another chapter of the book? I'm like, not tonight. And I just feel like horrible, you know, like if you don't read them. But we talked about a theme here already, and this what for me and what to thee and not for me, the hypocrisy going on here. And there's things going on out there, the ESG scores, capital reporting, ESG scores and DEI scores out there. The corporate world has no problem, and this is coming from the globalists on down, have no problem canceling, or I mean, we are in cancel culture city right now, and it's all from the left. It's not from the right. The right is just saying, hey, can you please keep your LGBT books out of my third grader's classroom? Thank you. Read them all you want. But not the corporate world, not the left. They're saying if you don't toe the mark with the ESG scores and DEI, you cannot operate as a company. And the ESG, this environmental social governance thing, if you're not supporting climate change, if you're not supporting, you know, their globalist agenda, we're shutting you down. The DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that is straight up LGBT. If you're not saying everybody needs to bake the cake and bless me, you know, and all this type of stuff. If you're not on board with all that, then you cannot operate as a company. We'll dox you, we'll tax you, we'll not allow you to do banking and all sorts of things. So the left is ruthless in shutting down anything that they don't like. Their Marxist agenda out there is in full swing. And so it's just laughable when they come out and say, oh, we're the victim here because, you know, you say you have some law passed that said I just don't want drag queen story hour, some homosexual guy in drag dancing or reading some sick book to my little kid. And parents, why would you allow your kid to be at that anyway? If that's not abuse, I don't know what is. But anyway, the hypocrisy and all that we've touched upon already is just really glaring out there.
Right. It shows that they don't have a problem with the form of it, which is censorship. They have a problem with the substance, what's being censored. Because they don't mind going by and censoring anything that Catholics or Christians or conservatives have to put out there. But when they get censored, they're like, oh, censorship, this is bad. And I think as conservatives, we don't take it far enough. We're willing to say, yeah, look, you can read your porn books, just do it when you're an adult. Don't let our kids do it. Whereas the left is relentless with it, and they just keep pounding and pounding and pounding and say, we want no compromises on any of this. You know, and that's a problem that we need to face as conservatives. And I think one way that we can do that is if we focus on building Catholic communities, again, talking about families specifically, we need to focus on building up these Catholic families and the positive connections, like, you know, a lot of leftists, a lot of LGBTQ, a lot of Africans even, they have these tight-knit communities that are based off of certain things, you know, principles of race or ideology or even sin in some cases. They bond over their own sin. We need to bond over our Catholic faith, and we need to strengthen those relationships with each other, and then we can take that out as a collective front into the world and say, this is how we're going to combat this onslaught. This
Before we go on,
onslaught.
though, can you speak to the resistance movement? Because they do exactly what you're talking about right
Yes,
there.
yeah. One of the things that our resistance chapter here in Detroit did is we actually had members go into various libraries here in Detroit, and we checked out as many of the LGBTQ pornographic, you know, critical race theory books that you can imagine, and we kept them checked out. This was during Pride Month for as long as we could, and then we had various members go to Salvation Army, things like that, where they could get Bibles and catechisms and things for very cheap, and they donated all of those to the library in place of that. So you're trying to do everything you can to get this crap out of these places and put something positive in their place.
That is a great idea, and, you know, we just have a few minutes left, so we should offer solutions to the public. You know, what can we do to push back? That's a great idea, what you just talked about. Also, the movement that Kirk Cameron has started, and he's encouraging other people as well, is you know, rent out the library for an hour and have a faith-based reading hour for locals. And if the library pushes back, then you take action. You complain. You say, hey, they're discriminating against me. And then, you know, the library will, you know, they'll have to give an account for that. But that's something anybody can do. You don't have to be anybody special. You could just be a mom. If you wanted to go and say, hey, I'm going to gather a bunch of kids kids and other moms, and we're just going to do a faith-based reading hour, Catholic reading hour. In fact, they did like a nun reading hour recently here in Michigan. It's wonderful. I believe many people attended that. So these are little ways that we can kind of push back.
This story itself is inherently a success story because Scholastic actually censored themselves based on laws passed in red states or perceived to be soon passed, based on parents pushing back. Your family is the future. You need to protect the family, and that starts in the classroom when they're very small, which everybody's getting. And so parents need to keep going to these school board meetings, complaining about this, going to the library saying, hey, this is all the garbage in there, keeping track of places like Scholastic, what type of books are they importing, clamoring to your local establishments and to your, first of all, libraries and schools, but also then ultimately to your lawmakers. And if enough groundswell, which is already happening, 30 states they say this is happening. So it's a winning mix. Keep doing it. Keep the pressure on. Keep lawmakers out there, back them, on that. Keep writing to them saying thank you for doing this. Appreciate what they're doing. Support them in that to give them courage and strength. Keep moving on this because you got to protect the minds, to protect the souls, to protect the family, children, for the family, for the future of this country and the world ultimately.
Yeah. No, and it's working too. I mean, this pushback is working. And get video. If you can get video, because that's the stuff that goes viral on Twitter, and that's why so many school districts flipped from liberal to conservatives, because these videos were going viral on Twitter of, school board meetings and parents getting angry and reading excerpts from pornographic books, and it opened up Americans' eyes because most of us were not aware that this was going on in our schools. So if you can get video on your cell phone while you're at a school board meeting and then post it on Twitter and then share it, that's a very powerful, effective way to push back. But it is working, and we cannot sit back and be passive. So pick up, the battle standard and join in the fight for our children. All right, thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Salve Regina,
Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus exules vilia ire, a te suspiramus gementes et flentes in hoc lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, iros tuos misericordias oculos, ad nos converte, et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis pos hoc exilium ostende, o clemens o pia o dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, God bless you.